Hello, my friend, and welcome to another episode of Catching Your Breath, the podcast. I'm your host, Steve Austin, and I'm so glad that you're back. It's been a month, and I'm really grateful that you're here, and I'm so excited to share with you Lauren Sisler's story today. You might know Lauren from ESPN or the SEC Network. Maybe you remember her from her days as a gymnast at Rutgers. What a great, great lady with a brilliant story. She is so incredibly passionate about what she does, and I'm just so thankful to count her as a friend. But before we get into this interview, I want to tell you about a new thing I'm doing and absolutely loving it. It's called BetterHelp. I am using BetterHelp as my therapy these days. I downloaded the app and I have access to my therapist 24/7. Here's why I use it. We're all recovering from something. You've probably heard me say that before. When you think about it, life is just one big series of lessons. It is unpredictable at best. It's crushing at worst. If you have that one nagging issue that you've been putting off dealing with, I encourage you to check out BetterHelp. I started using BetterHelp this year, and I love the freedom of therapy on my terms. It's therapy via my smartphone. It's convenient, it's affordable, it's private. There's no more of this having to request off on Tuesday afternoons and feeling that awkward pressure to tell your boss why. BetterHelp is therapy on your terms, on your schedule. I have access to my therapist, her name is Brooke, via text, phone, or video chat. The coolest thing, my absolute favorite part of this, is if I forget to check in with Brooke for a few days, she will actually send me a personal note just to see how I'm doing. So I love BetterHelp for the ability to connect when I'm in crisis or if I'm facing a stressor. You know, when that's going on, I want help right now. I don't want to have to wait 2 weeks until our next appointment. BetterHelp makes therapy more comfortable, more convenient than ever. And here's the cool thing. You can save 10% off your first month when you sign up at betterhelp.com/catching your breath. That's BetterHelp, H-E-L-P, betterhelp.com/catching your breath. All right, let's get into this interview with my friend, Lauren Sisler. Lauren is a multinational award-winning sports broadcaster working with ESPN, the SEC Network, and AL.com. Her journey was not always full of victories and celebrations. In 2003, as a freshman at Rutgers University, tragedy struck Lauren's world when she unexpectedly lost both of her parents to their concealed battle with addiction. Through her grief and despair, Lauren found the courage to continue moving forward and find success. Lauren now shares her story across the country in hopes of spreading awareness about the dangers of addiction and the devastation it can cause for those who abuse substances, their loved ones, and the community. This conversation is honest, it's raw, and it's hopeful. So, without further ado, here's my friend, Lauren Sisler.
It's been quite an adventure, quite a journey from where I was and where I am today. To kind of take you back and just sort of paint a picture, I grew up in a middle-class suburban neighborhood in Roanoke, Virginia. It was my mom and my dad, Leslie and George Sisler, and my older brother, Alan. We were 2.5 years apart, and we spent a lot of time together as a family. We were that close-knit, tight group family. My brother was usually competing in various sports. He was a 3-sport athlete: baseball, football, basketball. My dad was most likely on the sidelines as a volunteer coach. Me, on the other hand, those of you listening to the podcast can't see, I'm actually 5'9". So I'm a little tall to be a gymnast at this point in my life. But I will tell you that, growing up, I was a ball of energy, and my parents said, we got to do something about this. So they enrolled me in gymnastics, and that really became my sport and my focus. And so my mom spent a lot of time driving me to and from gymnastics practice, always peeking through the window, watching me progress as a gymnast. And there was always a hot meal on the table and a lot of family time and weekends spent jumping around in the backyard while my parents washed the cars. And, my parents were just there for me and my brother, loving us unconditionally, lifting us up in our successes, applauding us and helping us when we were down. And that was the childhood I grew up knowing and understanding. And so as I started putting my dreams into motion to be a collegiate gymnast, I wanted to earn a scholarship. I was training a lot of hours, 20, 25 hours a week, commuting over an hour each way to practice, and started sending out my resume tapes and my commitment tapes, and finally got an offer from Rutgers University. And so this girl from Roanoke, Virginia was going to go to Rutgers University and compete on scholarship, and it was something I dreamed of, and my parents were so thrilled and excited. And I'm off to college with all my dreams ahead of me. And I'm 18 years old, and it's my second semester. I'm at Rutgers. And basically, like every day at school, I'd give my parents a call right before bed, as I always did, and talk to my mom a little bit about gymnastics practice, talk to my dad about schoolwork and just a little about life. And we both, all three of us on the phone together, said, I love you. And that was it. And nothing seemed out of the ordinary. And so I set my alarm clock and went to bed that night, and woke up to a phone call just after 3 o'clock in the morning. And of course I see the caller ID and it says home, and I knew something had to be wrong. So I answered the phone, and my dad was on the other line, and he said, Lauren, he's like, I need to talk to your brother. And I said, what's wrong? And he really, you could just tell there was a lot of distress in his voice. I said, Dad, what's wrong? And he said, Lauren, your mom died. And I said, what? What do you mean mom died? I don't understand. 45 years old, seemingly healthy. Yeah. I don't understand. And he said, Lauren, I don't have an explanation. I can't explain it now. Get on the next plane you can. I'll be at the airport to pick you up. And so I get on that plane, and, I just remember being frantic. And all I wanted to do in that moment was run and jump in my dad's arms. And I wanted an answer. Yeah. You're 18. You've been away from home for almost 2 semesters. You just want answers. You want to know how at 3 o'clock in the morning do you get a call from your father that your 45-year-old mother, who's seemingly healthy, is dead. So as I get off that plane, I go running through the terminal, and I run outside, and I still see that airport plain as day. It's my home airport. I fly in and out of there all the time when I go home, and it brings back some tough, harsh memories. But, I'm standing there on the curb, and I'm looking everywhere, and my dad's not there yet to pick me up. And instead, my uncle and my cousin pull up to the curb, and they get out. And, at this time, I'm thinking my dad's probably just taking care of things. Sure. He had to go to the hospital. He had to take care of some things. He'll be at my aunt's house. I'll see him soon. And we get in the car and we start driving. And finally, I worked up the courage and I said, Uncle Mike, I said, where's my dad? And I remember him pulling over the car. And it was like everything went into slow motion. I can still feel the gravel underneath the car when he pulled the car over. And he said, Lauren, I'm sorry, but your dad passed away too. So within a matter of just a few hours, both of my parents gone without any explanation at all.
18 years old.
18 years old. And while
seemingly like all-American perfect family. Everything
on the outside seems so normal. And every family has their dysfunction. Every family's going through stuff. But on the outside, it just didn't seem unusual. My parents came to visit me in February. I'd seen them over the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas. And, life seemed normal. I was living out my dream. My brother was in the military. He was traveling to and from visiting my parents on weekends when he was stationed down in Virginia Beach. And that was it. And so it would actually be 90 days before we would learn what had happened to my parents. Wow. The toxicologist had 90 days to bring back a report, and it took every bit of those 90 days.
90 days of no answers.
Of no answers.
Just wondering.
Was it intentional? Was it suicide? What happened? Well, both of my parents overdosed from the drug fentanyl. Fentanyl typically given to terminally ill patients. My parents had been going to a pain management doctor. and both of them experiencing chronic pain. And while obviously they were seeking medical help, and my mom had multiple surgeries over a few years, my father had chronic back pain also requiring surgery. My father also suffered from PTSD. And so he did struggle with alcoholism. And that was something we knew as children. But a lot of times it was something that it would happen. He would relapse. He'd go on a weekend bender, and then everything would be fine.
Right.
And he'd go 6 months or a year, and we wouldn't even think about it. Mm-hmm. And then it would happen again. And then my mom said, you need to get back to AA. As a kid, though, I couldn't process that. Like, what is that, you know? And so I just knew Daddy struggles sometimes, and it's fine, and everything's okay. But outside of that, you know, the use of prescription drugs didn't seem out of the ordinary. Mm-hmm. But hindsight's always 20/20. Looking back, I think about, well, you know, I'd be on the couch, and my dad'd be over in the recliner, and within 10 minutes into a movie, he'd be, you know, asleep. And he's just tired from work that week. Sure. You know, commuting an hour to work every day, and he's just tired. And that became some of the signs that now that I understand what prescription drug addiction looks like, I better understand. But both of my parents had taken, they were on various prescription drugs, but OxyContin, and then eventually it escalated to fentanyl and a time-release patch. But unfortunately, my parents, had found ways to alter that to be able to get the high quicker and what they needed from that. So not only were they living with the chronic pain, but they were living with the addiction pain. Yeah. But it was such a concealed battle. And that's when I look back now 16 years later, I'm like, how in the world were they able to hide this from us for so long? Yeah. You know, at Thanksgiving, my dad overdosed when I'd come home from college. We both found him. My brother actually found him first, laying on the couch and not breathing. And we were told by my mom that he had bad reaction to medication. But what we later found out, years later, my aunt told me that your dad actually read somewhere online that he could take the medication, and he wanted to get that fix that he needed because he was dope sick. Yeah. And he needed that. And that's what we were told. And then I went back to college and everything seemed normal. Yeah. So as you can imagine, I paint this picture of this perfect, normal life because that's the lens I saw it through. Sure. But then you come back full circle and you look back and you're like, wow, this is actually what was happening. And while they were still a loving family and still gave their shirt off their back to make sure my brother and I were taken care of, they did their best to paint a picture because they did not want people to know that they were battling this addiction.
I think it's so powerful and important to hear this story because for so many of us, the stigma around addiction, you picture the druggie, you know, living on the street, needing that next fix, shooting up, and you kind of paint this not very lovely picture of the kind of person that is. But you're painting this picture of loving mom and dad, husband and wife, working, and this started very innocent. I've got back pain. I've had to have surgery. And I think that we forget so often that that's where it starts. It is something so innocent, so necessary, so practical. And then that monster can kind of grow. Boy, thank you for sharing.
Well, one thing I want to add to that when you talk about the picture you paint, the person that's living on the street or under the bridge. Yeah. And for even so long after my parents did pass, and really I did an enormous job of trying to keep all of those skeletons in the closet, sugarcoating the story. I would tell people, you know what? My mom died of respiratory failure. Well, she did. In fact, that is what took her life. Yeah. But I didn't use the word addiction or overdose. I couldn't do it.
Too much shame.
And then with my father, heart attack, heartbreak. Couldn't live without my mom. And you grapple with the thought process of, was it intentional? But I know in my heart and through my spirit and my faith that my parents, neither one of them would have intentionally left this earth. Yeah. But you've been there and you understand it and the amount of pain and the grief that you're going through, the constant robbing Peter to pay Paul, the finances were spiraling out of control. They're trying to figure out how they're going to keep me in college, how they're going to support me in my dream to continue my education, all these things they're going through mentally. And so through that process for me, I spent so many years trying to put my parents on a pedestal and say, you know what? That wasn't their problem. Like, that wasn't their problem. And then even initially, when I started to understand and come to grips with the fact that they were prescription drug addicts, my aunt, Linda, who was my mom's sister, really kind of broke those walls down. It took her a long time, day by day. I mean, we went, just fighting all the time. No, Linda, that's not what happened. No, like, I'm not going to accept that.
Yeah.
She said, but Lauren, this is how it was. You can't allow how your parents died to define how they lived. And that's what you're doing. And so for me, it was so important to come to that realization and say, okay, how are we going to do this different? But even in that process, my parents are prescription drug addicts. That's different than shooting up heroin and living on the streets and being druggies.
Sure.
But you know what? At the end of the day, it's not different. Everybody gets there in some way.
Yeah.
Everybody's led down that path in some way.
Yeah.
When my parents, when they came in to investigate, they found those fentanyl patches in the freezer. That's where you cut them up and take them. They found a plate under the sink with a razor blade. And so with all that being said, it was going down that path. They were going down that path eventually.
Yeah.
Because they had not sought out the help that they need, because they were living in shame.
Yeah.
They were so ashamed of their condition and what they were battling. And I think that's where we really have to stand tall and say there is no shame. You've got to get help. You've got to seek treatment. And I think the more that we talk about it, you, me, the rest of this world, stand up and talk about it, no matter what.
Yeah.
And I've learned that in this process as somebody that, look, I am very blessed and fortunate to be a sports reporter. Oh my gosh, you're on ESPN, you're on TV, you're interviewing Nick Saban, you're interviewing Charles Barkley. Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah.
But then they read my story and they're like, wait a sec. Like, this girl has been through it, and she's experienced some of the same things I have. So maybe all hope is not lost. And that's what I hope people understand, is we're all going through something. We all have a story.
Gosh. I say it all the time. We're all recovering from something. And it doesn't have to be an addiction, a pill, but we're all recovering from something. I think about my own story prior to the suicide attempt. Xanax was prescribed innocently and appropriately by my doctor because my anxiety was through the roof. Well, it went from taking the Xanax when I needed it to taking it preemptively. I know I'm going into this conference and I'm going to be really stressed out in this conference room for the next 2 hours. I'm just going to go ahead and take a Xanax, whether I needed it or not, whether it was time to take it or not. And it became this numbing thing, so much so that this was probably 2 years before the suicide attempt. I went to the doctor and said, don't ever write it for me again. Don't write me Klonopin. Don't write me Xanax. Don't do it. I've got to find another way to cope with this because I like this way too much. I like this numbed out feeling because I was hurting. I was so ashamed of the depression, the anxiety, the PT, all of it. And that was a way for me to, at least for, a little while that's in my system, to numb myself out. So I get it. I get it. So you're interviewing these famous people, you're having a blast on TV, and yet you're not yet telling your story. So how does all that unfold?
Yeah, so I would say it really took me about 7 years to get to the place where I was able to share my parents' story, but it only started very small.
Okay.
And basically, as I told you, my aunt started kind of breaking those walls down.
Yeah.
And I mean, she would share with people more of the truth. Not necessarily in great detail, but sometimes we'd be sitting there at dinner with some friends or, people that we knew well or other family members, and she would start talking about the situation and unveiling some of this stuff. And I'm like, absolutely not. I would just get so angry and fidgety, and I can't listen to this, and this is not my parents. But over time, as she broke those walls down, even my best friend for 7 years didn't know how my parents died. My very best friend. And so the person that you trust the most, right, with that information. And so finally, about 7 years after they had passed, I was able to start sharing that information. And it started one by one, with my best friend, with a coworker. And then the groups got bigger. I'm able to share it with with the person sitting next to me. And then, 3 or 4 people. And then, I can actually walk into a room and share it with a group of people.
Yeah.
And now, I walk into an auditorium full of 500 kids or, an organization, and I feel my parents are standing there next to me as I share their story. I feel they're sitting here right now as I share their story. And to me, it took me such a long time to get there. And as a person that has pursued broadcasting, I never thought that I would be in broadcasting and doing what I'm doing in this capacity. You go into TV thinking like, oh, cool, like I get paid to talk about sports, like I get to be on TV, like look guys, I'm on TV, right?
Yeah.
And that was the thought process. And then as the years went on, and even as I'm starting to share their story with the person next to me, my best friend, my family, whatever, I still wasn't very public about it, and I would still sugarcoat the story, and I wasn't very vulnerable. I wasn't very transparent.
Sure. We'll wrap up the conversation with Lauren here in just a moment, but I just want to say, if you are having those same feelings like Lauren, I don't know how to share my story. There's so much shame. I haven't even worked through my own pain. This is the perfect time to get professional help. So one quick reminder here in the middle of this episode, check out betterhelp.com/catchingyourbreath. Save 10% off your first month and get the help you need on your terms, on your schedule. It's affordable, it's convenient, it's private. betterhelp.com/catchingyourbreath. All right, let's get back into this episode.
But as I'm starting to build my career in TV, I'm realizing my job is to tell people's stories. My job is I have a platform and I have a voice for someone else that has a story that could impact other people's lives.
Absolutely.
And yet I can't even relate to that. And there was a shame inside of me because I'm holding all this stuff inside and I'm not even able to share my own story. Mm-hmm. Like, who am I?
Yeah.
Who am I for you to trust me to share your story, and yet I'm lying about my own?
I get it.
And then it's like, whoa. And then then all of a sudden, it's almost like this fire ignites inside of you. And maybe you felt that.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, like, what is this? Mm-hmm. And it's something, it's almost like so hard to explain.
Yeah.
But the level of freedom that you feel, and I feel like I relate it to the shackles of shame. I feel like you're shackled to this shame, and that finally when those shackles break off, that suddenly you are in a place where you are finally living your life with a purpose.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I just think that if we can get more and more people to feel that way, it might lead them to get the help that they need for themselves, for their family members, for people around them. And to just take off that mask and be who you are, be true to yourself. And it's okay to be broken, because you know what? I also feel like the things that break us also make us stronger.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like that's what leads us in the direction. Without going through everything I have gone through, granted, I'd do anything in the world to bring my parents back.
Sure.
I'm set to get married in May, and probably one of the hardest things for me is planning this wedding kind of through the eyes of like what it would be like if my mom were standing there helping me pick out my dress. But I have to tell you, my Aunt Linda has really kind of stepped in and been, and my uncle as well. My Aunt Linda is just such a, spitting image of my mom, but getting to share those memories. And the one thing she kept telling me, she's like, Lauren, she's like, you're always going to have those memories, but in life, whether your parents are here or not, you're going to meet the man of your dreams. You're going to get married and have kids, and all those memories that you have with your parents are going to be there, whether they're here on this earth or not. Yeah. But you got to build new memories with your family. Yeah. With your family and your friends. And if you sit here and constantly live in the past, life is gonna pass you by, and you're gonna look back and be like, man. And that, I feel like that's so true, because even if they were living here with us today, I would still always have those memories, but life continues to happen, and you grow and you change, and we grow up. Yeah. That's the hardest thing to accept, growing up. Sure. I struggle with it. Yeah, at 35 years old.
I got all this gray and this beard right here, and I still struggle with it.
I'm just like, what? Where is life gone? Yeah. We're cruising through football season right now, and I'm just like, my goodness, the season is almost over. Yeah. But you gotta count those moments and those blessings and the memories that you have and build on those. Yeah. And that's what I keep telling myself. No, my parents aren't going to be there to walk me down the aisle, but I think about the pride that they would have in that opportunity to see me marrying, my fiance, John Willard. Love you, John. Just a bright, brilliant young man who treats me, like a princess, like a queen. And, we just align in so many ways in our faith and everything that we strive for.
I love it.
And, I think that's what we live for, and taking those next steps and getting through those milestones and knowing that, like, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and you're going to go through it. And I'm going to go through a whole lot more in this lifetime.
Oh, yeah.
But you got to battle, man.
You do.
It's all about that resilience and that strength, and building that strength and recognizing it and saying, you know what, this is my suit of armor. This is what has gotten me to where I am today. Yeah.
So true. One of my little catchphrases is that scars are just grace tattoos. And I think that's it.
Yes.
You can be all cut up and you see, oh boy, that's when that happened and that's when this happened. But rather than, I think the shift from victim mentality to I'm a survivor is seeing those stories and going, let me tell you about that story. Let me tell you how I lived through that. Let me tell you about the people who drug me kicking and screaming through it for a time, and then how I survived. And that's totally what your story is, a story of survival. So wrapping up here, that one person's listening and they're in the middle of their shame story. They are shackled. They are drowning beneath the weight of all that shame. And I tell people often that's what nearly killed me. It wasn't the depression. It wasn't the anxiety. It wasn't the PTSD. It was the shame of all that. Not being man enough. Not being Christian enough. Not being strong enough to pull myself up. It was the shame of all that truly nearly killed me. So that person's listening and they're in the middle of their shame storm. What's that one thing that you want them to know?
I think that everybody in this life deserves to feel they belong here, that they are worthy, that they are worth it.
Yeah.
No matter the mistakes that they've made, no matter what they've been through. I think it's so important to know that you are worth it. Whatever it is you're going through, whether it is addiction and you feel this deep shame that you continue to go back to the bottle or back to the pill and you can't get off of it, you belong here. And I'll never forget later on finding out that my father, when he had overdosed at Thanksgiving, had said that to my aunt, maybe to my mom, and my aunt was standing in the room, had said, maybe you'd be better off without me. And to know that my dad ever had those feelings, that he wasn't worthy to be here, and that he wanted to take the burden off his wife, to my mom, and off his kids, me and my brother. Mm-hmm. You are worth it. And you deserve a good quality of life, just like anyone else. And your journey there might be different. And it doesn't have to be the nice cars and the fancy clothes and the nice house and all those things. Because I'll tell you what, I think people pursue a lot of those material things and say, this is going to define me. That's my success. That's Absolutely. My metric for success is the money and the material things. But what I've learned through it all is that it's none of that. And I think that, I would just encourage anybody that's kind of living in that shame to know, like, you are worth it. And that there is no price tag for your life. And there's no price tag for who you are. And I think that if you can emerge from those shadows and know that you are worth it, no matter what you've been through, no matter what mistakes you've made in your life, and to just stand tall and say, okay, I'm going to take the next step to being a better person, to being a better version of myself. What does that journey look like? How do I get there? And, start leaning into people, start leaning into resources and finding ways to build yourself up. It's like a staircase, take one step at a time. And it may take one step might take you 1 year to get up one step. But that's fine,
Yep.
And everybody's story is different. I think we live in this world of comparison. It's really tough with social media, let me tell you.
Absolutely, it's the worst.
Your journey is your journey. You don't need to look at everybody else's highlights and say, man, how do I get there? Because you know what? You're gonna spend your entire life in disappointment. Because chances are you're seeing everybody's highlights. You're not seeing the lowlights in their life. And I think it's so important to realize, like, you got to do you. You got to get on your own path and your own journey towards wellness and success. And what does that look like? Your success is going to be different than someone else's. And I can assure you there's a lot of people at the top of their food chain cashing in the big paychecks, and they're probably looking at me or you or somebody else saying, man, I kind of want that simple life.
Yeah.
I've been around the celebrity life. I've been around the Charles Barkleys of the world, the Tim Tebows that have to position themselves in such a way they're in the spotlight all the time.
Exhausting.
They can't turn it off. Yeah. And I think how exhausting that would be, and how well they handle it. You know, Tim Tebow handles it so well, being able to just like, you know, be in that limelight and to use it to his advantage. But you know, there is no switch.
Right. You're in the fishbowl.
And I just think that that's the same for, you know, CEO of a company, or the person that's cashing in, you know, $1 million paycheck, a head football coach. You know, that $7 million paycheck sounds great and all, but it comes with a price.
Absolutely. And
so, you know, I just encourage people to stay in your lane, focus on what you can do to be a better person, and what you need to do to be able to find yourself and find your identity and be the person you want to be, regardless of the mistakes and all the things that you've been through in your life.
Lauren Sisler, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's it for another episode of Catching Your Breath, the podcast. Huge thanks to Lauren. Follow her at laurensisler.com. You can get all of her other information, social media, and all that in the show notes on this episode. I'm so grateful for you. I'm grateful for your support. Follow along with me at catchingyourbreath.com. Join our private Facebook group where we continue these conversations every single day and support one another. We cultivate vulnerability in a safe community. You can do that by going to patreon.com/I am Steve Austin. I'll see you in just a few weeks.